Okay, everybody, welcome to another episode of Cowboys Overtime here on StarTelegram.com. The Cowboys season continues, and so do we. We're actually the best part of what is a terrible Cowboys season. I want to thank Window Nation for sponsoring this and every other episode of Cowboys Overtime. I am Fort Worth Star Telegram columnist Mac Engel. He is Dallas Cowboys know-it-all, Mr. Nick Karras. Nick, we have a lot to talk about because the Cowboys, even though they don't provide anything in the win column, do consistently provide content unlike any other franchise in professional sports. The Cowboys lose on Sunday to the Philadelphia Eagles 34-6. It could have been so much worse. And Nick, right off the jump, are we expecting for this to get so much worse here in the coming weeks?
Yeah, I believe so. I think with you just take how this team has played during this 4-game losing streak, and you look at the beginning of the 4-game losing streak, that loss to the Lions, and then you look at this most recent loss to the Eagles. There's a lot of similar complexities to both of those losses. Granted, you don't have Dak Prescott anymore, so it's not like you can right the ship offensively completely going down the stretch. Defensively, you are getting some pieces back, and I honestly do feel like this defense is playing better. They just need an offense to complement them at the end of the day. You saw how they started that game against the Eagles. The pass rush was active, but then eventually it broke in the second half, and they were asked to do a little bit too much. I think if they can just have an offense with a little bit of a pulse, then we might have something positive to talk about. But as of right now, Mac, I don't see that coming. You look at the couple of opponents that are upcoming. We'll talk about the Texans here in a minute. You got the Texans, the Commanders, and then the Giants on Thanksgiving. And you have to imagine if you lose all three of those games, we're going to be talking about a lot of change coming out of Thanksgiving.
Cooper Rush started for the first time this season. And the Cowboys said this week they're going to remain with him as the starting quarterback. He wasn't very good. And the weird part about it, and you and I talked about it in the press box, it wasn't that he just necessarily didn't look – I mean, he looked hurt. I mean, if you go back to 2 years ago when he played with Dak Prescott out with his thumb injury, Cooper Rush was making some down the field throws. Cooper Rush was making some plays that made you say, this guy can move an NFL offense. Now, he didn't look like Patrick Mahomes, but he looked good enough, and it was more than justified when the Cowboys gave him a multi-year contract to be the backup. On Sunday, that looked like the preseason version of Cooper Rush that we had seen him, where he looked like he had hit a ceiling and maybe even regressed. I didn't even recognize that guy out there on Sunday. Do you blame it on him? Do you blame it on the fact that his skill position players can't help him, or his line just isn't very good?
Yeah, I blame it on a lot. I think play calling also. You look at what he tried to do, more than 10 yards downfield. Do you want to guess his completion percentage? More than 10 yards downfield in that game.
Are we talking about throws that actually went 10 yards down,
Yes,
like just a swing pass?
Yes, like air yards.
Oh, I'd guess 1 of 7.
1 of 9. Good job, Mac. Yeah, it is.
I didn't see that. Are you serious?
Yes, the one completion was exactly 10 yards. So there was a lot going on for him, I think, from a play calling perspective too. I think there's more concern though when you look at that. It's because they weren't really asking him to do a whole lot, and he still did nothing. And Jerry Jones had mentioned this morning on the radio that he may have battled a neck strain whenever he dropped that shotgun snap and had to go down and grab for it. He said that's not an excuse, but it could have been something that he was battling during the game. Whatever it may be, you can't throw for 45 yards and me expect you to take you seriously as an NFL quarterback. And I think that's eventually what happened there late in the second half where Trey Lance came into the game. They're just like, hey, can we figure out something offensively that works? And they didn't find anything. I think for Cooper Rush, though, it has been 2 years since he's been asked to take over in a regular season game, in a meaningful regular season game. Granted, last week in Atlanta, it kind of showed that he can move the offense down the field. He could get some things going. He was finding Jake Ferguson, finding CeeDee Lamb. But there was just absolutely nothing working with a defense that prepped for a defense that prepped for Cooper Rush going into that game. I mean, you could factor in Kellen Moore knowing a lot about Cooper Rush. You could factor in it being the Eagles. They know a lot about Cooper Rush. They've played him twice. I think there's just a sense of maybe familiarity that played a role. But again, you can't throw for 45 yards in a game and expect to be taken seriously moving forward.
There were a couple other things I took away from it, and I'm sure you did too. One, it illustrates Dak Prescott was actually better this season than maybe we were giving him credit for, because once again, a problem that we knew that was going to be a potential reality in the offseason reared its ugly head in the worst way possible, which is their skill position players. I'm talking running backs, wide receivers, other than CeeDee Lamb, and even to some extent the tight ends. I know we want to make Jake Ferguson to be, a little bit better than what he's produced so far. I mean, Nick, they gave him nothing. I mean, they haven't given Dak a lot. They just help. And I think it illustrated the help that he had 2 years ago and the wins against Cincinnati and Minnesota and a couple others. Those were legitimate players who could help out a quarterback. Well, this is a skill set of guys that if it's not right there on the plate, they can't go get it. And I don't know what they could possibly do between now and the end of the season to dramatically change that. Yeah. Can they?
Yeah, there's nothing that they can, in my opinion. I mean, they bring in a guy like Jonathan Mingo, and guess what? He's one of the least separating receivers in the entire NFL. So it's all the problems that you have been seeing with the receiver group are expected to only continue. Granted, he could add a different layer to the offense. That's something that they will toy with for the next 8 weeks and figure out what exactly they have at the receiver position. But nevertheless, they have a lot of work to do over the offseason at the skill positions. You look at the running back group, Rico Dowdle is starting to prove that maybe he might be worth keeping around. I think you can look at these last 2 games. You look at the game against the Steelers. There's something there. I do think he has a little bit of explosiveness to him. You know how much I have been crapping on this run game as the season has gone on. But I think there is something there with Rico Dowdle. I just don't think he's an RB1. I think he would be a great complementary guy to use in receiving situations, to use as a change of pace, third down back if possible. But I don't think he's an RB1 at the end of the day. Then you look at CeeDee Lamb. I think that explains itself. And then Jake Ferguson, he's your only tight end on the roster in my book. Luke Schoonmaker has completely played himself out of the offense. Brevin Spanford hasn't done much to inspire confidence in his own right. And then John Stevens Jr. has another ACL injury out for the year. So they're going to have to revamp all 3 of those positions in my eyes. And then also look at the offensive line. I mean, granted, Cooper Rush, at least he had a left tackle that was keeping things in place. Yeah. In that game against the Eagles. Got to give Austin Richards credit. He played really well. In my opinion, he was the best in pass protection on Sunday, probably the second best as far as overall offensive line play goes. And that's a big task for the second-year guy of North Carolina. But looking at those skill positions, they have a lot of revamping to do this offseason.
What do we make it? Well, I know what we make of it. I mean, you mentioned it. They did put Trey Lance in at the end of the third quarter, gave him a couple little plays, and then they brought Cooper Rush back in, and then in the fourth quarter, they just let Lance play out the rest of the game. In my mind, the coaching staff has made up its mind about what they think about Trey Lance.
Yeah.
I know you had talked about it maybe, and I certainly have written about it, giving this guy some look. Should we plan on seeing him against Houston on Monday night? Are they going to do anything with him? Or are we looking at a steady diet of Cooper Rush? If the game gets out of hand, Trey Lance?
I think there is still a implementation of packaging that they could use for Trey Lance, even if the game is close, let's say late. But that would take a little bit more of a miracle than Trey Lance actually starting, I think. But Cooper Rush is still going to be the starter going into Houston. Mike McCarthy confirmed that yesterday. I think this is a situation that if they lose maybe 4, 5, 6 straight with Cooper Rush as starter, then maybe they turn to Trey Lance just to see what they have there after playoff contention's already thrown out the window and everything like that. But until then, I'm still expecting a 10 to 15 snap type share for Trey Lance and used only in RPO type situations just to throw some athleticism into the offense.
All right, let's go on to the other topic, and that is a head coach who is in the final year of his contract. Mike McCarthy looks to be DOA, dead coach walking, whatever you want to call it. And then unintentionally after the game, Micah Parsons, in an effort to praise Zach Martin and other veterans on the team, but specifically Zach, stumbles into saying, yeah, whatever happens to Mike McCarthy, I don't really care. Now, and then, of course, it provides good content for his podcast. Micah has done this a couple times during his career, which is sort of verbally fall into situations where he has to come back and say, well, what I meant to say was, and I don't believe in his comment, Nick, he was trying to bury the head coach. I think what he was trying to say was, look, coaches come and go. Mike's going to get another job. He's won a Super Bowl. He's had a career. A guy like Zach is the guy I'm more concerned about because he's at the end, and I don't know how many more chances he's going to get. That's what he was trying to say. But instead, he bumbled it and absolutely buried his head coach in the sense that these guys all know this guy's gone. Let me before I say this next part. Do you think Micah was intentionally trying to dismiss or minimize or even say he doesn't think anything of his head coach with his statement after the game in the locker room?
I do not. I do not think it was his intention. However, there was an opportunity for him in that instance to pour support into his head coach, a head coach that is in the final year of his contract and could need some support from stars on the team. And he instead deflected to other people in the building. That's what I see it as this is an opportunity to be like, hey, Mike McCarthy's our head coach. We're going to ride with him till the wheels fall off. We're playing for him. And that would have been great. That would have been just as headline worthy as what he ended up actually saying.
You're right.
But he didn't say that. He poured into the veterans. And you know what? I get it because I was talking to Nate Newton about this actually. And the sense that when you're talking about guys who are on the field with you, and are, putting in that blood, sweat, and tears within those sidelines, it's a little bit different than how you feel about your coaches. That's just end of the day. Sure. That's because those guys are putting in the work. They're sacrificing their bodies. Is that probably what Micah meant to say in that sense and saying that put more time and work in than Mike McCarthy ever did? Yeah, but it came across really poorly, and he has to identify that when it comes out of his mouth, and he has to clarify that. Because sometimes – there will be players who, maybe they communicate things incorrectly and they'll be like, well, I don't mean it like that. I support Mike McCarthy. He's my head coach. Just that these are the guys that are putting their bodies on the line. Boom. And immediately you wash away any concern that you could possibly have about that. I think with Micah Parsons specifically, for the first time in his entire football career, going back to high school in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, going to college in Penn State, this is the first time he's been asked to actually be a leader. And not only a leader for the locker room, but a leader vocally outside of the locker room, whether that be with media or him taking on this president role at Bleacher Report, things of that nature. I think he is still learning the landscape. And with that is going to come these road bumps where he just says things that he's maybe used to saying when he's not a leader, but it can't be taken in the same context now that he's one of the faces of this franchise.
I agree with all of it. And I know people now are, we were speculating him for the last 3 years just because he's the head coach of the Cowboys. Do you see any way, Nick, that Mike is back for a 6th season? I do.
Yeah. Wait, you say that he will be back for a 6th?
Yeah, that'll be back for next. So this would be his 5th year. Would he be back, which would mean an extension, maybe 3 years, whatever. Do you see any way he comes back next season? I think there's one path.
He has a good relationship with Jerry Jones, and I think at the end of the day, that is what's going to matter whenever those contract extension talks do happen. However, you can fully expect, I think, for him to be on a holdout as soon as the offseason starts, so that he gets that extension next offseason. Yeah. Granted, he'll have to finish the season healthy. He'll have to put up some of those sack numbers and show that he's remaining consistent. But I think I think it's probably a 75% chance he's back for that 6th season.
Actually, you know what? I bumbled that question. I meant Mike McCarthy.
Mike McCarthy. Okay.
Yeah, no, when you were answering that, no. I meant Mike McCarthy.
I was like, yeah, I think Michael will be back.
No. If I said Micah Parsons, I verbally stumbled on that one. Mike McCarthy.
Okay, Mike McCarthy. At this point, it's looking really tough. And it's funny because our great editor, Dave Amenheiser, he asked me that same question earlier today. It's like, do you see any reality where Mike is back next year? I was like, no, but it's Jerry Jones we're talking about. So
that's always the wild card. And here's why I think he has a shot. Well, first of all, let me go back. Who do you hire? But that's a separate conversation. This is why I think he's got a shot. There's no doubt about it, since he's become the head coach of the Cowboys in 2020, his quarterback, his meal ticket quarterback, is now injury prone. Dak Prescott will have season-ending surgery to repair his torn hamstring that he suffered 2 weeks ago in the loss in Atlanta. Tomorrow in New York, his season is done. You've talked about it before that was the most likely scenario after that injury, and indeed that's the case. Under Jason Garrett, when Dak Prescott was his quarterback, Dak Prescott started and played 48 of 48 games. Tony Romo suffered the injury back in 16. Dak took over and he never got hurt, or at least he played through some bumps and bruises. Mike McCarthy comes in 2020, and now by the end of the season, because of a variety of injuries his quarterback has suffered, Dak Prescott under McCarthy will have played 58 of 85 games. When Dak Prescott has been his starting quarterback, Mike McCarthy's record is pretty good, really good. 3 straight 12-5 seasons. In the 2 seasons where Dak is going to have missed at least half of the season, the Cowboys finished sub 500. You can make a case that when Mike has had his starting quarterback, even including Cooper Rush 2 years ago, the Cowboys met regular season expectations at least. And when he's not, the team stinks. Most NFL head coaches are going to follow that path when you have a quarterback as good as Dak, whatever you think about him. So there's my avenue in thinking maybe Mike has a shot. And then the other one too is Jerry. You just never know with Jerry. But to that specifically about Dak, I wrote about it. I'm sure you've thought about it. Given the types of injuries he has suffered, multiple surgeries on his ankle, a serious calf injury that really changed his season a couple of years ago, and now a hamstring injury that requires season-ending injury. Is there any way to think, especially because he's over 30, that this man is anything other than injury prone?
I think it's something you have to look at. The one thing that sticks out to me is him wearing the boot before the season began, him being pictured in Cancun with the boot on his foot. And is that a sign of tendonitis in that ankle that he broke all the way back in 2020? I think that might be. And then you look at how his scrambling opportunities and his rushing attempts have taken a nosedive going into this season. You take that into context and you're like, okay, that injury has played a role in how he's played over the last. He admitted it during the season. It's like, hey, is it fair to say that ankle might be a reason that, your rushing has decreased? And he was honest about it. So I think him coming off of this hamstring, it's a 4-month recovery. He'll be ready to go by OTAs in May. He should be ready to go by late March, early April. But how much of that will play an extra role into him not wanting to scramble as much, him wanting to not get out of the pocket? When Dak Prescott's on the move, I feel like that's when he is at his best, when he is extending plays and playing above that 2.3. I know Mike McCarthy loves for the offense to lay below the 2.3 from time to snap to throw. But I personally believe that when Dak Prescott is playing in play action, when he's scrambling out of the pocket, when he's extending plays, when he's going downfield with his legs and showing that to be a threat as well, I think that's when this offense is at its best. And if you take that element away from who Dak Prescott is for these next 4 seasons, then he's going to either need a play caller that can figure out how to adapt to that, or he might not be the guy 4 seasons from now.
Well, I think as most of these guys have shown who want to age and age well, it's not necessarily about taking off and running. Tom Brady didn't take off and run. Aaron Rodgers doesn't really do it. Yeah. Peyton Manning really didn't do it. Eli Manning really didn't do it. Maybe a little bit more than those other 3 guys. It's more about the ability to move.
Yeah.
And you don't have to sit there and run around like Lamar Jackson or any of those quarterbacks. You don't. That's a different game. Lamar Jackson's fantastic, but Dak Prescott is not going to play that game. And we shouldn't think him to. If he's going to be successful in my mind and extend plays out beyond 2.3 seconds, he's got to be able to buy time with his feet. And the great passers can do it. It doesn't mean you're running. It means you're moving. And if he can do that, then he's fine, assuming the Cowboys get him a little bit more help. But if he can't, if he's just a traditional stationary guy, they're in trouble, and he's in a lot of trouble. And you can't say which one's going to happen, but as long as he can do some things with his feet and buy time and move around, I think he's going to be okay. Do you think he'll be able to do that this time next year?
Yeah. If one thing I can give Dak Prescott credit for throughout his career, he's always worked. And I think if he has somebody telling him, hey, you need to work on this so that you can be a productive quarterback for the next 4 years, he's going to do it. And so I will always put trust into Dak's work ethic how it directly translates onto the field, I think that's dependent on the people around him. That includes head coach, that includes play caller, and that includes the skill group he has. I think in this last contract, assumed last contract that he'll have with the Cowboys, he's going to need the best skill group he's had in his entire career.
Yep. We got that and more to talk about here on Cowboys Overtime. But first, let's hear from our friends at Window Nation.
Window Nation, the star of window replacement and proud partner of the Dallas Cowboys, can help you fill the house this season with savings. Buy 2 windows, get 2 free, and make no interest payments for 60 months, 5 full years. Fill your house for a customized authentic Dallas Cowboys jersey while supplies last. You could even help fill the Cowboys house and win tickets to a game. Visit windownation.com/Cowboys now for details. Call 866-95-NATION. Window Nation, proud partner of the Dallas Cowboys.
Thank you very much, Window Nation. Mac Engel back here on StarTelegram.com's Cowboys Overtime. We can pretty much sure that the Cowboys will not be going into overtime next week or in any other game this season because they'll
Hey, Giants and Panthers are still on the schedule.
It's all on the table. It's true. All right. So one of the more entertaining elements of Cowboy games, especially the 3:30 kickoffs, Nick, and you've been there for a lot of them, are the maddening instances when the sun breaks through the west end zone and then basically blinds any player looking back in that direction. We talked about this. I remember when they were in the planning stages of this stadium and how important aesthetics were to the Jones family and why they wanted to do certain things as an homage to Texas Stadium. There is a hole in the roof, but they have a retractable roof that never retracts. I mean, the weather for Sunday's game was perfect.
Yeah.
It was 75 degrees and sunny. It was a day you want to be outside. The Cowboys closed the roof, which I think these retractable roofs are a neat idea, but nobody opens them up because basically what everybody is waiting for is 72 and sunny. And I'm sorry, we're not living in California. We're just not. So I think
taxpayer money, first off.
There's the truth. So, at one point in the second half, Cooper Rush throws a ball into the end zone. Jake Ferguson can't see it. I think the ball was intended for CeeDee Lamb in the back of the end zone. He can't see it. You can see him at one point blame. He says, the sun was in my eyes. And it's legitimate. Anybody who has stood back there and looked against that sun, you can't see. You just can't see. Jerry Jones was asked about it after the game on cue. He got quite defensive about it, suggesting, what do you want us to do? Tear down the whole damn stadium? I'm in favor of, I take that back. I'm not in favor of tearing down the stadium, but because Arlington already has 3 pro sports venues within like an 8-foot radius, I think they need another one. So I think my goal, Nick, is that they keep AT&T Stadium open and then they build another one, like maybe where the Walmart is, and you build up like another, maybe 110,000 seat venue. And this time you get the sun thing right. So that way Arlington's going to pay for all of it. And then that way Arlington will have 4 pro sports stadiums right there within, a 30-second walk. On a serious note, the curtain thing has come up. Other events have draped curtains over those windows. I was at the Taylor Swift concert. I've seen other events. I think the Super Bowl, they dropped them down. What is preventing the Cowboys from just saying, you know what, it's a 3:30 kickoff. Yeah, let's just drop those down. What do you think?
For me, this is my theory. I don't think this is a design flaw. I've seen that brought up a few times over the past few days. I don't think this is a design flaw because that would imply that they did not think about this when they were designing the stadium. I think it was very much in the thought. I think it was brought up whenever things were, putting into it back in 2008, 2009, put into action, being like, hey, Jones family, you're going to have a sun issue for afternoon games. Perfect. And I think maybe they could see that as like, hey, our team's going to play there every week. So eventually it'll be an advantage for us and a disadvantage for the other team. The thing is, though, they only play at that stadium with those sun issues probably 3-4 times a season.
Right.
And their opponents play there sure, once, but in total, 3-4 times a season. I think it'd be different if they were practicing there every day. I really do. If they were able to factor in where that sun would be on certain days and they were able to, adjust around it, and they're in that building 365 days a year, I think that would be different. Some of these other teams, they operate out of their own stadiums. Carolina's the first one that pops to mind. I know there's others, but they don't. That's not the reality for it. And this stadium was built east to west. Mac, do you want to guess how many football stadiums in the entire state of Texas are built east to west?
None.
4, and only 1 in college and professional. And there's only 2 that are operational. It's AT&T Stadium,
okay,
and it's Memphis High School up in the Panhandle. I believe it's along 287 as you're going like up through Childress to the Panhandle. Those are the only 2 that are built east to west.
That is a phenomenal nugget.
And it is something that you factor in whenever you're thinking about sun during football games. Because you think about the University of Texas, for example, right?
Yep.
Whenever they're playing an 11 a.m. game or a 2:30 game, you see that sun and it goes about halfway across the field, and then it eventually dies down like in the second half, like every other football stadium does.
Right.
But instead, the AT&T Stadium's a little bit different because it'll come right in. Obviously, the stands have a little bit of a gap in between, and you can't ever really judge where that sun is going to be on any given play. You can judge where the sun's going to be at a University of Texas or at a Kyle Field or at Amon G. Carter Stadium. You can't do it at AT&T. And whenever CeeDee Lamb has a play like that in the back of the end zone, it's something you cannot practice if you are not in that building 365 days a year. And they're just not. And unless they want to move their entire headquarters to AT&T Stadium, they need to put curtains up because it's affecting the team at the end of the day.
Well, they're not going to. I mean, let me. What would it take for them to say, okay, here, we'll put them up?
Man, I would think we're at that point, aren't we?
No, because when Jerry Jones was asked about it, and he's defended it for years, and I remember, when they build baseball stadiums, the sun is a priority for the backdrop behind batters, right?
Yeah.
So where they place home plate is a big deal. And the one neat thing about baseball stadiums is that everyone's different. I love that reality. And when I mean different, I mean the dimensions are different. Baseball is the only sport that can get away with it. I love that. I think that's neat. It makes each stadium its own experience. When they opened what was then Minute Maid Field, the president of the Astros had this idea, along with the owner, of putting the center field pole basically in the field of play near the back of center field, along with a bit of a hill right behind it there in dead center. I loved it. That's cool. That's unique. I like that. That's different. If you're a center fielder of the Astros, you can get accustomed to it. And it does give you a little bit of an advantage in that sense. Like you said, they play there every game, every home game. And so they can get kind of accustomed to it. Well, the players whined about it, and eventually new ownership took over and they removed both. They took the hill out, they took the flagpole out, and now it was Enron Field then, and now Minute Maid Field just has some weird, funky dimensions.
Yeah.
Jerry Jones, when he was asked, so I understand that ambition with stadium design. A football stadium, you can't really. It's 110 yards. Pardon me, it's 120 yards total. 10 yards for each end zone, 50 yards sideline to sideline. There's only the same thing with hockey, basketball. There's just so much you can do within those 3 sports: basketball, hockey, and football. So I understood what Jerry's point was. Hey, it can be kind of an advantage here, kind of like dead spots in the floor, referring to how basketball courts used to be, and specifically at the old Boston Garden, because like you said, the players were always playing on the Boston Garden's floor, and they knew where the dead spots were on that floor. But part of me thinks this is ridiculous. This is a silly ambition or parallel between a guy who's equating something from 1970 to here in 2024, where everything has basically been professionalized and turned into a 5-star hotel, for better or for worse. And to sit there and sign off on that and to try to spin it like the dead spots in the floor. I'm like, you're kidding me. You're absolutely kidding me. It is a disadvantage for the other team. The criticism I thought Jerry Jones had of, well, wait a minute, why did you, if you win the coin toss and you know which way to go, why did you pick that way in the first place? And there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
To me, this was a cute design flaw that is not worth the headache. And I don't think they're going to change it. But that's amazing to think of all the football. Think about all the football stadiums that exist in this state.
Yeah.
Right. And the most expensive one goes east and west.
Yes, it's think about this: when the World Cup goes to AT&T Stadium in 2026,
Yeah.
FIFA will basically take over that building for about a month and a half, 2 months.
Right.
They'll tell the Cowboys get the heck out. It's our building now. I can guarantee you they'll put curtains on the back of that window. And if you go back to a World Baseball Classic or something that I don't know if it was ever played at the old Enron Field with the hill, they're not taking the hill out.
No, but you're right about that. I mean, you can, I was at Arrowhead Stadium. I don't know what they call it now, Jiha or something, on Saturday in Kansas City, because I went to the Kansas Jayhawks Iowa State football game, and FIFA is going to. The Arrowhead Stadium is holding 6 games, World Cup matches, and to get to FIFA's dimensions will require digging into part of the stands and the 4 corners of where the end zones are, right? So that's no joke. So not only will FIFA drape a giant curtain down the west part of the back of AT&T Stadium, they're going to cover every piece of signage. That means the AT&T Stadium logos, those are going to be covered. Yep. And you're 100% right. I've seen that before. I've seen Olympic games and things like that. So if they don't own it, and they don't get the profit from it, they're not sharing. Then those places don't get a pass. And it'll be really fun to see when the World Cup comes and they do that. And then Jerry has to answer that question then, because he'll be front and center. Last thing we're going to talk about here, we'll move on, is the big showdown on Monday night. That's right, the Governor's Cup. The Houston Texans will play the Dallas Cowboys at AT&T Stadium. 7:15 kickoff. Texans come in 6-4. The Cowboys, who cares, at 3-6. The Cowboys are 7.5-point underdogs again. Houston is pretty good. They're on top of what is maybe the worst division in football, and they've had a couple of tough losses. They've lost 3 of 4. They lost by 2 against Green Bay, and they lost by 3 most recently against Detroit, even though Detroit threw 5 interceptions. If you're a football fan in the state of Texas, and you had to look at who's got my better, where do I have a better chance of winning the Super Bowl long term? Are you riding with Houston, a city and a team, multiple franchises that has never gone to wow. Houston has not been to an AFC championship game since they've been the Texans. They hadn't been to a championship game with the Oilers in forever. And they, needless to say, haven't ever gone to a Super Bowl. Or do you go with the Cowboys? You're a 5-year-old and you want a pro team in Texas. You think, I want to win a Super Bowl. Where are your chances better, quicker? The Texans or the Cowboys?
I think Texans. They have a quarterback who's playing really well on his rookie deal, and they have an ownership group and a general manager who is trying to maximize that rookie being on a rookie deal. They go out in the offseason and they get Azeez Al-Shaair at linebacker. They go and get Stephon Diggs via trade at wide receiver. They go and get Daniil Hunter as another pass rusher opposite of another cheap pass rusher, and they have in Will Anderson. They are trying to maximize their window. It's never felt like Dallas has tried to maximize their window at any point. Even when Dak was on his rookie deal, didn't feel like they were really trying to maximize that window. Sure, they brought in Amari Cooper, but they needed a lot more than that at that time, and clearly so. They weren't even able to push to an NFC Championship game. So I think overall, I think you look at the talent that Houston has and the amount of time that they have those guys wrapped up, I think probably Houston's your better chance.
Even though that franchise in the one before it, which is now in Tennessee, has never sniffed a Super Bowl.
I'm trying to think, is Steve McNair technically under the Titans tutelage?
Yeah, he was with the Titans. Now he was drafted by Houston.
Okay,
and then they moved, but they were They were in Nashville. Yeah, they were very much in Nashville. They weren't in Memphis anymore.
Yeah.
Obviously he was one of the few players on the Titans, that Titans Super Bowl team that barely lost to the Rams in the Super Bowl, that had any affiliation with Houston, any linkage to Houston. We talk about bad. The reason why I'm asking that question is, we're criticizing the Cowboys. There's still some franchises out there, and you can see in my banner to one of them, the Cincinnati Bengals. There's some franchises out there that I'm convinced are a hell of a lot worse than the Cowboys.
Yeah.
And until somebody shows me different, it's Houston's done a good job the last couple of years, but as a pro sports football team in that city, if you want to buy in a curse, they're pretty close.
Yeah. I think if you look at the talent that Dallas has, the all-pros that they still have on both sides of the ball, you compare that to the Detroit rebuild over the course of these last 3 years.
Yeah.
If you put somebody who can make those types of decisions, both draft-wise and bringing in what they saw as a franchise quarterback, I still believe that Dak Prescott is a franchise quarterback. If they can just put some more pieces around them, I think it could work out. They're slated to have 10 to 11 draft picks, depending on compensatory picks in 2025. Go reload, and they should have some room to work in free agency as well, more than they did last year. Go reload, and I think there's an opportunity to do that still.
All right, so Nick Harris has the Cowboys winning the Super Bowl next season. Nick, thank you for your time. For all of your Cowboys coverage needs, Cowboys, Texans, I'm assuming you and I both think the Texans will cover.
Yes, yeah.
That's Monday night. God be with you, and God be with the Cowboys. Luckily, they won't need any curtains because the game kicks off after dark. Cowboys Overtime. Thank you, Window Nation.
What about the moon?
That's good. What about the moon? Forgot he said that. See you next week.